Well, let's hone in on that headline story. Icasa says it's studying the policy directive for a possible change in law that would allow Starlink and similar telecoms companies to operate in South Africa. Communications Minister Solly Malatsi has now formally gazetted a request for public comment. Let's bring in Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I mean, it seems a bit like a cop-out for someone to accommodate someone who calls South Africa's transformation laws racist.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Look, I think from our side, we're not too much concerned about the noise, especially the noise on social media and the fake news, etc. I think for us, we welcome investors. We need to have investors. We have an economy struggling at 1% growth for the past 15 years. We have a real crisis of unemployment of 43.1%. So I think at a principal level, we welcome investment. Investors don't have to be our friends. We don't have to go to dinner parties or have them over for a braai. Might be obnoxious at times, it's fine. But as long as investors comply with our local laws, that includes broad-based black economic empowerment, it includes our tax laws, our labor laws, and so forth, then any investor is welcome to come. The Triple BE Act does provide for equity equivalent exemptions. So that, you have many investors who come through, whether it's a Ford or an IBM or Microsoft, etc. These large global national companies, they may not necessarily want to have local BE shareholding, and that's fine. So hence the Act does provide for equity equivalent. It might be in the form of giving support to local suppliers when you procure your products, your goods. It might be in the form of doing corporate social investments, investing in schools or providing internet connections to rural communities, etc. So there are a variety of options. So from our understanding, that what the minister has done, and it will have to be coordinated with the minister for DTIC as well as the custodian of BE and investment legislation, that you can have equity equivalent exemptions for telecommunications and for mining. Those must still be addressed, but it must be done in a way which complies with BE, including equity equivalence. It must also be respectful of other local companies who have always complied with our legislation, whether it's BE, whether it's tax laws, whether it's labor laws. So it's a delicate balancing act. But I think in a principal level, no, the law does provide for those kind of equivalents. The ministers for DTIC, for communications, would be the ones required to make such determinations. And of course, like in this case of telecommunications, Icasa has got a statutory role to consider equity equivalent exemptions. They'd already started the work late last year, so it's not a new thing per se. But I think it's just a question of finding the right balance between, yes, you want investors, but equally we must also respect our laws and find the elegant ways to ensure compliance at all times.
Yeah, and when you talk about equity equivalence, I see that this includes programs like investing in local suppliers, enterprises, skills development, transformation, job creation, infrastructure support, and the list goes on and on. So you're saying that the discussion on social media and the response by people like people in government about transformation, about this being a case of bending the rules to try and get someone like Elon Musk into the country, you're saying let's put that aside, let's focus on what the investment will bring, what the opportunities are, that not only get Starlink into the country, but other companies like it.
No, exactly. We have to focus on the principles, and the strategic objective is always to attract investment. The objective must always be to see how do you bring investment into the country, how do you spur economic growth, and how do you create jobs. And yes, you must also comply with the law, and the law is accommodating. It's always been. Number one is to support broad-based black economic empowerment. But sometimes some companies are not able to do so because of their own ownership structure, etc. So you don't want to block such investors coming in. And there has been precedents before. It has happened before, if I'm right, with Ford Motors and other companies too. But
so this wouldn't be the first time?
It's not the first time, not at all.
Yeah.
And that's why the ministers are given the exemption powers. And all of our laws largely always have some sort of exemption clause. It's not a blank check. Because you can't undermine the spirit of the law. You don't want to create a flood which will collapse the law. But there are procedures, there are provisions to allow for exemptions in limited cases. But specifically, if you can't comply with the broad-based economic empowerment, then that's what they have equity equivalence. Can you support local producers? Can you make sure you hire local people for their jobs? Can you do corporate social investments, whether it's in schools or infrastructure, whatever it might be? Present your alternative options, and government will take it into account. But the idea is to say, how do you create an inclusive economy? The laws are not rigid. They're elegant. They try to find the right balance. But as long as we can create jobs, as long as we respect our laws, and as long as we advance the transformation agenda, then I think that's mission accomplished.
Right. So Matthew, are we able to measure this equity equivalent? So when we talk about skills development and economic inclusion, if you're not going to adhere to the triple BEE part of compliance, do we measure the equity equivalent of that?
No, they do, and they'll speak to a variety of options. And so what the Minister for Communications has done, and it must also be in sync with the Ministry for Trade, Industry and Competition, is to say they're going to provide for equity equivalent options for telecoms. The public has got the space to respond over the next 30 days to say, yes, are they happy, or no, are they not happy? What are the conditions? What are the requirements and so forth? Because you must get the right balance. You can't simply say that these companies have always applied and complied with the law. Now we're going to undermine that and allow others a blank check. So there has to be the right balance. Or we've got to respect existing companies who've abided by our laws, but give space for those who have some difficulty with certain parts, but can provide alternatives. But then the next stage will then be up to those companies who want to enter and want to apply for equity equivalent exemptions, whoever they might be, not just Starlink, might be other companies too, to say, here's what they could put on the table as an equivalent offer. If they can't comply with BE, it's fine. But can they support local industries to supply their products, their goods, their materials, etc.? Can they provide other corporate social investments? And if they can do so, then yes, they can get an exemption. If they can't do so, then unfortunately, what can we do? But the space is there to be agile. The space is there to be inclusive. But as long as we make sure we achieve the fundamental objectives of attracting investment, of creating jobs, of spurring economic growth, and finding some sort of way of complying with the law, including our transformation agenda.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know that, right? It's at the top of our agenda. We talk about the employment statistics so often. We've just had the budget speech this week. There is a deficit that we need to fill. We know we desperately need investment in our country. I suppose what's clouding perhaps the criticism on places like social media and in other forums is the divisive character that Elon Musk is.
No, sure. And look, not every worker loves the employer. I'm sure you'll find many employees who will not be impressed with the employer, but that's fine. We're not getting married here. We're not having a bride. This is not, invite the investor for a beer competition. The criteria is that, are you going to bring money into South Africa's economy? Is it going to help create jobs? Is it going to help spur economic growth? And can we always look at how we support local businesses, local suppliers, create a value chain? And if you can do that, fine, yes. You may not be our best friend. You might have some weird views about life. I'm sure many other investors who invest in South African companies have some weird views. I'm sure so many of our local businesses have very obnoxious views, but that's not the issue. The issue is, are we going to help grow the economy? We're going to help create jobs and make sure we comply with our laws, including our tax laws, including our labor laws too. But I think we can find the balance. And the law, you find in almost all the laws, there is always some agility, some space for the minister to have some exemptions, but then there's criteria set to them that if you can't meet the criteria of A, B, and C, can you meet the alternative criteria of 1, 2, and 3, but the spirit must remain intact in principle.
Yeah, another perhaps divisive issue, just in the gazetting of this policy directive, is that this is a DA minister, the Communications Minister, Solly Malatsi, and we know that the DA is challenging the country's equity laws in court.
Yeah, so look, our laws remain our laws. Whether one is a minister from the DA, whether one is a minister from the FF+, doesn't matter. The laws remain the law. They're binding upon all persons, including DA ministers. But all of our laws, will stand the test of time. So if any minister, doesn't matter even if they're from the ANC, if any minister transgresses the law, undermines the law, the person who's aggrieved can go to court and say, you have not complied with the law, and the court will find in favor of that litigant. Ministers also have to report back to Parliament. Regulations fall within the minister's domain, but they must report back to Parliament around compliance and so forth. That if a minister is found wanting, they can be held accountable. And of course, ministers also are bound by cabinet too. They're accountable to the president of the country, who is the president of the ANC. So we're not having a free-for-all. This is not a circus. We have one state, we have one government, and we have one set of laws. So it doesn't matter which party you come from. all ministers are bound by them and they can be taken to court if they fall foul of it.
All right, Matthew Parks, thanks very much for coming on this Friday afternoon. Matthew is Cosatu's parliamentary spokesperson, talking about this policy directive, alternatives to South Africa's BEE ownership requirements in the ICT space. Icasa, the Independent Communications Authority, says it is still studying the policy directive.